First of all, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. We're super excited that you decided to join us and learn with us today. Paul's had this on the books for a while now to show us a little bit about Cypress end-to-end testing, kind of saving yourself a lot of time on UI development, all those repetitive tasks that you end up having to do. So I'm super excited to see this. I've only scratched the surface with Cypress, so I'm excited to see Paul share with us what he knows. Paul, take it away.
Thanks for having me. My name is Paul. I work at a company called MakerBot on the applications team. So MakerBot is a company that produces 3D printers, like the actual hardware. And my team works on the applications, a number of applications that you would interface with your machine. I've been lucky enough to that basically everything I work in is web technology. For the most part, we currently support our users with an Electron app. So our desktop app is built in Electron. We are in the process currently of moving a lot of that out of Electron into the web browser. But we also are going to have a new version of an offline version for folks that have tougher, Wi-Fi guidelines, military contracts and whatnot. They need to be using the app fully offline. So, but luckily, yeah, everything is more or less JavaScript. So I'm going to go through what I found to be very useful in end-to-end testing with Cypress. I've started to roll this out on our web properties, and I'm hoping to do the same with the Electron version because it does support that. Yeah, so I had already had I had a little bit of like an upfront talk on Cypress. Just I gave a little demo to my team, as well as some management types and whatnot, people that needed to non-technical folks that just needed to see what we were getting into. So I'm going to go through some of those slides just because I already have them and I think they're pretty useful. Going through some test code may be a little dry, so I'm happy to pass off what I learned. And definitely, if you got happy to pass off this little upfront as well. If you guys have the same need, sometimes you need to relay things in a less technical way. So I'll get started with that, and then we'll look at some of the code and see what I've been up to. Can you guys hear me, by the way? Is everything cool? Cool. All right. So Cypress, let's go full screen here. You guys can see that still?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. So essentially, what is Cypress? I think in the days of old, if you've done any automated browser testing, you're probably familiar with Selenium, things like that. And what Cypress is sort of like a modern take on all of the things that you used to be required to run automated browser tests. So that is, a testing framework, a test runner. In some cases, you may need something like Selenium and a WebDriver to actually run through your application. And Cypress basically scoops that all up into one roof, makes everything very easy to use. I found it to be incredibly useful as primarily a JavaScript developer because it essentially is all the tools that I already use. It essentially, what Cypress is a small little Electron app that you install into the root of your application, and from there you write your tests, and they essentially Cypress has direct access to your application. And so what's really great about that is you totally sever this need of like a browser stack or Selenium or something that is required outside of your app that you have to hook into, maybe send requests over the wire, or in the worst case scenario, having to like build up state for a certain test to run. And so what I mean by that is the example I'll go through is I started to use Cypress on just starting out simply on our login form, and that worked out great. But if you think about any subsequent test that comes after the login form, you would have to get your application in a way that you would maybe use WebDriver to build up the state to get it to the place that you now want to run that specific test. And without having to do all that, Cypress is just essentially anything your app can do. Cypress is there, and you can control your application. So anything your app does, you can automate with Cypress, which has been pretty great. What's it good for? I kind of broke it down into these few things. Ease of use, like I said, I didn't know a whole lot. I knew about Cypress. I've used the other frameworks that are out there over the years. Mocha, Jest, I think, sort of upped the bar in terms of what a test runner could or should do. And I kind of feel like this is the next step in that. There's not a lot of, I guess let's call it innovation in terms of testing at this point. Inputs, outputs. Did this do what I wanted to do? Did this show up? Is this in the DOM? That sort of thing. There's not a whole lot of innovation going on there, and I feel like this is actually something that did pick up on some things that made things very easy to use. So it's got a lot of features. Cost essentially is zero. It's an open source project. In order to pull it down, to use it, to integrate it, all free. There is a paid tier on top of that, which gives you sort of like a web GUI, which sort of monitors the tests that run in if you have it hooked up to your CI/CD pipeline. So that is very useful for maybe non-technical folks that just want to see what's going on, see where the app is struggling. But outside of that, that's not something that my team has needed yet. So effectively free. So that's awesome. And like I said, it's not Selenium, which is also seemingly a big win. Ease of use. This sort of like because Cypress is now like integrated into your app. You fire it up, you run the test. If something breaks, you can debug it in the browser itself. I'll show you what that looks like. You tweak the code in your code editor, and as soon as you hit save, test runs immediately right after that. So it's very, very streamlined, and there's not a lot of plates that you're juggling on the side. So that's awesome. In terms of innovation, if you guys have written a lot of tests before, you may get into a place where maybe because of some asynchronous behavior, the test will kind of flake out, will run half the time, not the others. And if you're like me, I've had to go in and just hard code, like some weights, basically hard coding time at that point. Like, oh, it takes a little while to munch through this data and it's not passing. So let me add 500 more milliseconds, and it works now. And like, I don't have time to fix it, so we'll just roll with that. That kind of stuff is pretty annoying. What's great about Cypress is it basically has a lot of that stuff under the hood. It will essentially, when you run a test, say if you're looking for an element in the DOM, it won't run the test until that element is present in the DOM. So you kind of avoid these race conditions of the test running and things flaking out. It basically takes on some of that logic, and just you don't have to write that sort of extra logic. Same thing with there's some default assertions. So if you're making any HTTP calls, it basically assumes that obviously you can overwrite this stuff, but if you're making a call to a service, presumably there should be a 200 response in there, and you don't have to code that in. It knows that that's what you're looking for and just removes that from the equation. So that's great. It will go ahead and auto clear storage, cookies, any of that stuff in between tests, so you don't have to, I could write that sort of logic in too, where you don't want the next test to have you'd be stepping on the state of the previous one. So basically, between every test, it just wipes the state clean, which is great. Very reusable. The docs, I gotta say, are pretty awesome. I pulled this down in about an hour and a half. I had all my tests written. I had things abstracted. Everything was running very easily. It was very easy to integrate. The docs are it's one of those tools where you pick it up. I feel like it's rare. You pick something up off the shelf and it's just like, oh, I get it. Oh, they've thought of that too. And here's a video about it. And it's like really great community. I think that carries a lot of weight. And some of the other stuff about, like I said before, very modern in terms of front-end apps, JavaScript and whatnot. You can hook into VS Code and get IntelliSense. It's very much suited for modern web dev, but also Node and Electron and for other uses. I kind of compare this to I worked at agencies back in the day, and our designers used to work in Photoshop all day long for years, right? That was the tool of the trade to design websites, right? And then it was like, well, really, we're just making pictures of a website and try to bring that to a client and explain the interaction with them, right? And then it wasn't until those tools like Figma and Sketch came along and it was like, this is actually more the tool for the job. And I feel like that's where this is going. It just makes more sense for what the task at hand is. And it's very much the same syntax and things that you're used to. It actually uses Mocha under the hood as the test runner. So all the APIs that if you've written anything in Mocha or Jest, pretty much the same deal. So there's nothing really new to learn, which is awesome. Feature rich, yeah, I'll try to go quickly through some of these. There's an interactive version, so you can run the representation of your app, or if you hook it up to your CI/CD pipeline, it's headless and will just run in the background, which is awesome. They say that it works with any CI, so as far as I know, I haven't gotten that far yet, but at every step of the way, it's like, oh, what about Docker? And it's like, oh, they have a Docker image template to like get you rolling. It's like they've thought of everything. It seems like, and by the way, I feel like I'm like really championing this product. I have no affiliation with them. I just had a really good experience, so just passing on what was really valuable. It will, if you have multiple VMs in your CD pipeline, it will auto load balance and it will just distribute the stuff. So if you need to run things in parallel, it more or less can handle that for you. So there's a lot less for you to have to do, and a lot of other good things. I'll skip through some of these and just get to the actual product itself. But yeah, it's not Selenium, which is great. I haven't done a ton of Selenium work, but I know it's a little heavy. Maybe certain people that it requires like a certain skill set, or basically you just remove all that. Like this is just testing your JavaScript app, which is great. Yeah, the fact that it's open source, it's really great. I mentioned you take advantage of all the JavaScript fervor, meaning like I pulled this down about a month ago, got some tests written, and there were some things that I had questions about or features it didn't have. And a month later, that stuff's already there, either by way of the community or the product has added new stuff. So it's moving really quick, and it's really great. I would say hands down, the most important thing that I've learned about this is not only can you automate your, let's say, the user's experience through your browser, you can test things in that way, but you can also just hook into, if you're using, say, like Redux or any state management, you can just hook into the Redux store and say, I'm going to run this test and I want the state to be at this place. And you just fake it. You just like skip right over all the steps, all like the laborious steps, and you say like, cool, here's where I want to start. Same thing with you can just make HTTP calls like straight from the test. So I'm going to demo a little bit of like I said, the login form. And where I am now is, now that I have that tested and I'm confident in it, now I'm just, for every other test, I'm just going to skip that and make the HTTP request and say, get my JWT and store it and say like, cool, now I'm logged in. I don't need to test that anymore. Now I'm just testing everything thereafter. So that is awesome. That's super cool. Just another couple quick things. This is at this point in my demo at my job, is when I was trying to appeal to some of the managers and PMs and whatnot, which is like, it doesn't cost anything. This is great. So yeah, that's pretty cool. There's a quick demo of the product, the sort of web view that you get if you choose to do that. So basically, it looks like this. Everything you would expect it to be. You can see your test runs. You can analyze each one. Pretty useful stuff. This was just sort of like an add-in. They've gotten a lot of funding, which is great. An extra $40 million in the bank can't hurt. It's open source. It's great. This little image I have on the right was, they have a little slice of their product roadmap up on their site. So the app that I'm working in right now is sort of like part of a larger app. It's just in an iframe right now, and I was having a little bit of trouble just like finding the iframe in the DOM, hopping into that, making the proper quests and whatnot. And so I pulled up their site, and it's not only can you see the open PRs of stuff that they're adding, but at the bottom of the list, they're like, "Hey, great, iframe support. That's next up." Like, cool. My prayers are answered. So just pretty cool that everything's super transparent. The only con I found so far is it doesn't support Safari. Apparently, some of the API in Safari, they don't expose the same things that Cypress needs to hook into. I stole a little bit for basically everything that I'm talking about is either from the docs or I just stole from Kent Dodds. It's stuff that he's talked about that I found very useful. So he talked about he tried to bring this into PayPal and they were not okay with not covering Safari. I feel like he made some pretty good points, which is that if you're in a place where your app is breaking solely on Safari, there may be some other issues. It's probably not likely that, obviously the different rendering engines and whatnot, it may be that Safari has some weird bugs, but probably not anything mission critical. So you may be able to polyfill those and move on, or if you do have Selenium, maybe run a couple, full cross-browser tests in Selenium and then move on with everything else. But the point being is, why give up all this great value that you're getting for this like extra 5% of Safari that you may or may not be super valuable? And I think Safari is on Cypress's roadmap, that it's just harder for them to get to, and that there's a lot of other stuff that's priority for them. So that's the only con that I found so far. Mileage may vary. So other than that, I think that's sort of the high level of what I found so far. So if we jump into quick demo, let me know if can you guys see this? The size is good. Okay, cool. So yeah, like I said, getting started with Cypress, just install it, and you get this little Cypress folder, which is the app itself. They get you set up with a bunch of great templates, get you rolling and pointed in the right direction. And basically, I just started writing my tests, and that is the extent of it. So you have it in your projects. I think there's a cutoff with Node. I think maybe it's 14. If you're running at least 14, once you have it in there, px Cypress open, and get is Cypress. This is a little Electron app that it added to my app. You can manage your test runs here, some settings and whatnot. You'll notice relative to the machine that you're on, it'll give you the different browser options that it supports. So this is what I have installed on this machine. Has the Electron version that I've yet to delve into, but you basically can choose which browser you want to run on. And then from the get-go, you just run from here. It'll spin up a Chrome instance and just start slamming through my tests. So I will start to give that a whirl. Any questions so far? Anything that I talked about? Pretty good stuff. Okay, cool. So like I said, I started with just a simple login form, and that is essentially just every permutation of no username, no password, wrong username, wrong password. And like I said, I wrote all this in about an hour, and it's been pretty great. So you take a look at one of them. So here is the browser instance, and there you have it. It starts running through my tests. And so what I have on the left is basically everything that I've written in my test. And on the right is, the instance of my application within this Chrome instance. So what's really great once you get in here is what I've not seen in any other testing platform is you basically see every step of the way what's going on. And this is all interactive. So I can mouse over and get the state from before that step ran, as to after. Yeah, I can see like what is going on in the test. This first round is just a little smoke test to seeing some of the assets are loaded on the page. But if I get into some of the actual tests themselves, you can see like, you can, I don't know if you can see, it's probably hard to see that the state is changing of like what is being added to this input right now. And so that's obviously helps with debugging, just kind of orienting yourself on what's happening in the test. But what's great about this is just running my web app in the browser. So I have access to, DevTools and everything else that I would normally. And at every step of the way, you can get an output of what is happening in the test if that's useful to you, which is great. But also, these tests for the most part are passing right now. But let's say something had gone wrong. I can just put into my web app and just start, I can still interact with it and change the state. And like Cypress is just running what I told this to run, but I can still hop in here and do whatever I need to do. So just the interactivity and just like the streamlining for like from test to app has just been incredible. It's incredibly easy to use. You can hop in and out of I don't know if it's in this version. Basically, there'll be a link in this view that will just hop me back over to VS Code, so I can start editing code if I want to. Just different views about like what you're seeing at different states in the test, and essentially what I have here so far. I'll go into the code so you can see what that looks like. So yeah, so my login spec, like I said, the API is nothing you've never seen before. Just doing a quick, in this describe block, I'm just doing a quick smoke test to make sure the elements are there that I'm looking for. This is a quick proof of concept, so I'm actually using some CSS selectors and whatnot, which is not the best thing to do. Ideally, you add some data attributes to those elements so that CSS changes won't now break the test. I haven't gotten that far yet, but so not everything is of best practices here, but yeah, essentially I'm just looking to see, is there an image on the page? The logo, is the title what I'm expecting it to be? And then from there, the next two describe blocks, which are these two tests, are just jamming through my different login permutations, I guess I'll call them.
So Paul, if I may ask
yeah.
a question.
Yeah.
This looks like, I use Jest. Generally, it looks like Jest. At the very top, I noticed essentially the website visit call. Yeah, cy.visit/ on the top of the code.
Yeah.
So that's the before each. So that was the little leap that I was trying to figure out how.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this should look very much like Jest, because it's essentially the same nuts and bolts. But yeah, so for each of these tests, I'm just ensuring that I have a clean slate in terms of the state and whatnot. So within some of the configuration, I have a root, sort of like a base URL in my Cypress config. And I'm just saying, like, go to that URL, hit the root before each of these tests. So what that translates to is, you can see before each, I'm now hitting this URL. There's a bit of, it's kind of funny. The login form that I'm testing is actually sort of sits above the app that I actually want to test later. So I'm just like hitting the service and there's like a redirect happening. So to call it simple, I'm just hitting that URL, letting the redirect do its thing. And in the test, I'm just essentially doing that before each one to make sure that everything's clear. Yeah.
It seems really nice that you actually get the visual like nesting of these things, because sometimes it can be hard to like I guess like interpret like, okay, I have this before each, but then like I don't necessarily always see it before each test. And so it's like kind of cool to see like that section where it's like before each it's doing this thing, then it has the test body, and then it kind of like scoots back out to do the next describe.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if you guys will be able to see it, but yeah, I mean these it's basically everything as you'd expect. My describe blocks are represented here, and with the it as well. And then every step of the way, it's just kind of clarifying for me what's going on.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I've also been using Jest. Now that I look at Cypress, I like it more. So I wonder, how many packages do you need to install?
To get off the ground, 0. So it's got Mocha, it's got the test runner, it's got the assertion library, it's got all that in it. I was actually talking to one of my DevOps guys who had written some API tests. So the interesting thing about Cypress is that they kind of position themselves as automated browser testing, made simple. And I think it even says that on their homepage, but really it doesn't require a browser at all, really, because you're just, using Cypress as a test run. So another guy on my team had written some API tests in Mocha, and he was like, I don't know, it's going to be kind of a pain to like port it over to this new tool. And I was like, oh, they're in Mocha, great. I'm pretty sure we could just drop them in here because it's essentially the same thing. So what we discussed in terms of like what the value of that is at least having the same tool for different teams to be operating in, but also because things are packaged within Cypress, and you're only beholden to their own versioning. Your versions of Mocha, your versions of Chai, and those things. You don't have to worry about things getting out of sync, or one doesn't work with this test, or this team is using a different one, all kind of under one roof. And that's to get started. So because it's open source, there's a pretty vibrant plugin community already. So it's like I said, there were a couple things that I didn't have right out of the box, but in 10 minutes of Googling, it's like, oh, someone figured that out already. Cool, let me grab that. So that is, I think there's two sides to that. That's like a double-edged sword. That could be great. That could be, you start to enter into like the WordPress plugin land if it gets like so crazy. But I found it to be really great. So DS, to answer the question, I didn't install anything but npm install Cypress, and they have some other visual regression tools and things that you can add as plugins, but I haven't even gotten that far yet.
And is it same for like it's a unit test? You don't need to install DS with Cypress for unit tests as well?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that, like I said, they position themselves as it's an end-to-end testing tool, but under the surface, they also say, but you could totally do unit tests with it. You could test React components. You could do all those things. If you're familiar with Kent Dodd's, his React testing library, he has, I think, like a plugin and a wrapper for Cypress as well. So if you use some of the API from that library, you can just bring that in here and use some of that same syntax. So yeah, it's essentially, yeah.
I actually had a question around that. So
Sure.
I love the idea of transitioning from unit to more integrated, thought out tests in the UI. So does Cypress kind of replace React testing library? You just pull in like the wrappers from the React testing library?
I think essentially it can, Cypress being focused on end-to-end testing out of the box, they're sort of capturing this like not Selenium, leaving the headache of all that stuff. And I think, I don't know about you guys. I think it's where I am at my job. It's probably not too uncommon. We have some tests, could be more. For whatever a number of reasons, it isn't always something that gets the attention that it needs. And if you're familiar with Kent Dodds has that like a testing pyramid, with the unit test being the atomic level, where it's like obviously very cheap and very easy to use, up to integration and then up to end-to-end testing. The value that at least where I am in my current role is that we didn't have enough. We didn't have a lot of unit testing. We didn't have a lot of integration testing. There's some, but we actually still do have a person, a QA engineer, that handles a bit on the firmware side as well. But when we have new releases, he also is like clicking buttons and trying to like confirm things, which obviously is not a great use of time. So getting up and running so quickly with this in this sort of like automated browser testing at least eliminates like the need for a person to be doing this stuff. So I think it's as much as you can make of it. I think if you really get wrapped up in this tool, you may find that you probably can do most of your unit testing and everything from here. But yeah, I don't know that it fully replaces things that have been established with Jest and unit testing and whatnot. But I think that it could if you wanted it to.
How about you, Paul, personally, just out of curiosity, are unit tests part of your habits outside of Cypress testing?
In the past, yes. But like I said, I'm in like an interesting position now because my team used to be fully we were supporting this Electron app offline, so we didn't really have to deal with web that much. But now that we are sort of merging a bit with the web team, different practices, are sort of sometimes at odds. Before I messed with Cypress, I would say yes. My thought would be, get all the unit tests in. We're not, we're not a TDD shop. I think having a tool like this, I have heard people talk about, it does sort of open that door in a much more meaningful way, because you could just open Cypress, pin it to the side and VS Code on the other side, and just have it there running your sort of like empty shell tests and do your red green refactor as you go, and everything is just right there. So it may push you to build more unit tests and whatnot. But I would say, yeah, my thought was initially, let's get all the unit tests in. Let's sort of like move up the pyramid as we go. And that's always the first casualty of time, that we just like, no one ever has like enough time to go that in depth. So yeah, this is sort of like a top-down approach where it's like, cool, at least if we can mimic the user flow and we know everything is working, there's a high rate of confidence. I mean, I think we should still backfill some unit tests and integration tests and work on some of the mocking of third-party services and whatnot. But I've just found this to be so easy to use, and so as an engineer, I have some confidence now that we didn't have as much of before. But I found this the value also in this, that it's so easy, is like all the people around me, the non-technical folks, management and C-level and whatnot, who are maybe like sweating if test coverage or whatnot as just like a metric that they can look at on like a PDF somewhere. This is just like, I'm like, cool, we're hitting the ground running, and we got we already have 30% more testing than we did last week. So I think there's a lot of value in that. So this could be the way to at least socialize testing and make sure that you're getting coverage. But yeah. Cool. So if there are no other questions, I can unpack a little bit more of this. So like I said, yeah, this block is just doing a little smoke testing. What I'm doing here is I'm running through all the permutations of a faulty login. And because Cypress has what they call commands, you can abstract everything out to be reused later. So initially in this one file, I just wrote all my login tests and whatnot. And then when I thought it'd be useful to use elsewhere, I just, right here, this login errors test is just a Cypress, I think what they call a command. So yeah, this is essentially just adding at this point in the code, I'm just slamming through this big block that I can reuse elsewhere. And this is just, like I said, all the different permutations of logging in incorrectly. So pretty cool in that way that you can just abstract some things. If other teams are using the same Cypress instance, you can start passing things around that way. I found that to be pretty helpful. And same thing for logging in. And I'll do another. What I wanted to show side by side is, like I said, any change that you make in your editor is just immediately picked up by Cypress. So I'm living dangerously here right now. I have Cypress hooked up just to my current staging site. And yesterday I was picking this up to make sure things were good to go. And we have a new designer, and she had been messing around with, it used to be the login button, and now it says sign in. So my test was breaking, and I was like, oh shit, what's going on here? And it's just so quick to see the change. So in that case, I would say something like, that's probably in this one. So the very first test, it's just looking for a button that has the text sign in. And previously it was login. And just making this quick change, I save it. And on the right, bam, like my new test is running like instantaneously, which is now obviously failing because it doesn't say login. So I found this workflow, I wrote the little description for what this talk would be about, and I tried to hammer on the idea that you're just kind of extending your current workflow. Like the fact that it's like that quick and it just is so integrated that, it's just incredibly easy to use. And so same thing with Jest or Mocha and whatnot. You have the same skip, or if you want to run one test, you can do like a dot only. If I only wanted to run, let's say this one, I would just give it one of those.
Do you mind?
And then I'll skip that smoke test and just hit this one. What's that?
Do you mind peeling the onion a bit and just stepping through the code? I don't want to necessarily direct you, but I'm curious to just stare at the code with you.
Yeah.
Like if you go
yeah,
up,
absolutely.
the button, you're logging, say unauthorized users trying to log in. So I'll get, yeah. Can you tell me what you're thinking? Just like starting on line 5?
Line 5. Yeah, sure. So yeah, like I said, this block was just the initial is the form loading that I was looking for. So there is the Cypress API does have some nuance to it. So some of this is a little different than Mocha, but for the most part the same. So in this case, yeah, I'm just looking for the page title to match this, making sure that's adequate. Just making sure that my logo is showing up, with some alt text for some accessibility purposes. This being a proof of concept, I didn't go too deep right here, but this is just checking to see is this form group appearing with the Google SSO sign-on button. I'm just checking to see if those have rendered more or less. Same thing with the link here at the bottom. So that is just like cool. I navigated to the page is what I'm expecting to be there, and you can mileage may vary. You can go as deep or as shallow with this as you want to. This is just my first pass at it basically. Yeah, and I guess moving along the incorrect login errors. So basically, I'm in my config. I have a username and a password store that I'm pulling in. I have this little bit here. This is what I'm calling junk, just to create like a faulty password. I'm just like tacking that on, and that bit is here. So yeah, walking through this a little bit. First test run is the page loads, and I just click this login button, see what happens. Make sure that I'm getting this error rendered on the form. At this point, I'm grabbing the user input. I'm typing in the username with that kind of junk attached to it, just so that I get bad. Just doing a little double check that was input to the form correctly. Then I'm using a correct password, and then just letting it rip and making sure that did not work. And so everything else is sort of like a variation of that. Incorrect logins. Just doing clearing out some of the forms so that I can sort of pick up where I left off. Yeah, pretty straightforward stuff. Is there anything in particular you want us to look at beyond that?
No, yeah, thanks, Paul, for stepping through that. The syntax is a little not used to just plain Jane unit testing. So just curious, like for example, on
and
you're pulling out input from the form.
Right. Yeah. So the Cypress get, there's a few methods that they have that are pretty straightforward, but yeah, those are slightly different than you might be used to. But like I said, their docs are just incredibly useful.
I wonder if Cypress has snapshots, just like Jest.
Yeah, you can make use. You can serialize stuff in very much in the way that Jest does. I think it's not. That's one of those things that I think is not out of the box, but the community has kind of plugged that in for. There's a bit of like I think like visual regression testing, that sort of thing. API. Yeah, so it's basically all the assertions and all the commands that you could imagine. Like a slight variation with the Cypress API sort of on top of that. But yeah. Screenshots. That's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, this is I can cue this one up for later, but basically one thing that I'm noticing is that like you'd mentioned earlier in the presentation part of it, there's not you're not having to like put in like a lot of like weights or like hey like when the content loads or whatever. I'd love to kind of like is this pretty common or like if this page took longer to load, would you have to insert something like that before some of these tests, like etc.
You certainly can. I think in the docs that what they're trying to avoid is that pitfall of, like I said before, where you're just like adding more time just so that for the sake of something to pass. So there's like a sort of like a threshold that they have under the hood that will try, retry, that sort of thing. I think there's like a certain point of time that it will wait before considering a failed test. You can tweak all that too. So basically, if you tweak it at more like a global level, you at least avoid having to like add it here and there in little places. Although you can if you need to. So yeah, it's just one of those like incremental gains of like, cool, I don't have to do that unless I have to do that, you know. Which I have had to do in the past with other applications and whatnot. So yeah, so now that I have confidence that that's the one thing, it spins up like a Chrome instance and I can never remember which is which. There we go. Let's get rid of that. So cool. So yeah, in an hour I wrote a bunch of login tests and whatnot. Now I feel confident that that works. So cool. Now that I want to test everything after that, what I was just doing yesterday is I wrote this one, which is instead of going to the form and plugging it in and hitting the submit, I just make that request directly from the test and say like, here, pass in this user and password. And when I get back the response, in this case, what I was going to do is parse out a JWT, store it in the instance that Cypress is running, so that I know that that passes. And then essentially, because Cypress will clear all that stuff out on every test, I'm basically just saying when I store this JWT, just leave it. Just when you clear everything out, just leave that. So that way I can run all my consecutive tests in a logged in state. And that's incredible, right? Like that, I'm just using my app to log in, sending it over the wire without the UI at all. I found that to be pretty awesome. And that one, you can see that one, which is essentially just logging in. And so cool. It's making the requests, it's reaching out, it's storing my cookie. Cool. My test is now logged in. I just ran this block. And now I can reuse this and just say in a before each, any test that I write after the fact, just consider me to be logged in, which is awesome.
Is it safe to assume you can write your tests in TypeScript?
I think there is they have caught up with TypeScript. I think when I first looked at it, it was like not quite so much there, but also one of the things that the community was sort of supplementing. I believe that, yeah, there's no reason to believe that there's no TypeScript support given where it is in the world right now. I haven't used it specifically, but I'm pretty sure you can do that. And yeah, I think that is. Yeah, I guess we had some questions. Some time for questions, but that was basically how easy it was for me to get this up and running. The value that I found in that little upfront, socialize like how. Sort of the idea is like you could be writing these Selenium tests or have something that is like outside of your application that there's like maybe some domain knowledge of, where it's like, oh, Jeff knew about browser stack and now he left and I don't know what the account is anymore. I don't know how to get in there. This is just like, you just eliminate all that and it's just like, this is your app. These are tests that are running your app. Cool. And from there you can build out. Basically at this point, I'm trying to leverage this as an opportunity to get more of a testing culture in place. Like, I forget who it was. It may have been Kent Dodds. He sort of implied that, as developers, we're probably not going to write tests unless they're easy to do. The more friction that there is between you and the tests, the less likely you are to write them. So something like this is just like, cool. You could just have this, and there's no reason you shouldn't be writing tests as you go. So yeah, that's where I am with.
It's obviously part of your workflow when developing and when you're deploying.
Mhm.
How about just a day in the life? I fear that my app may break kind of all as I sleep, because it has. Like I'll call it an AWS limit that I hit. So do you run tests routinely and automatically just to confirm that all is well in the world?
We certainly will. We do have some. There are some tests written in our CI/CD pipeline currently, and I think DevOps is making use of. They have some kind of testing in, I think, Datadog, which will sort of test your application in different regions, different countries, and whatnot to see, maybe testing like CDN effectiveness and that sort of thing. So we do have some coverage, some sort of like health checks that run offline. Yeah, the idea is to integrate this into the pipeline, which, as far as I can tell, is as easy as getting this level up and running. So that is sort of the next step or two that we'll be up against. But yeah, the idea is that you would integrate this into your CI/CD, and that can run pre-deployment, post-deployment, however you schedule it, offline, anything like that. Should much be feasible.
I actually have an example. I was just working on it 3 days ago on how to integrate Jest into GitLab CI/CD, and
Okay.
it will have the exact same principle. I can show.
Sure. Yeah. Let me stop sharing. Yeah. Also, what has been? Oh yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
So here are the 3 things I managed to add to GitLab CI/CD. First, the coverage report of the latest pipeline. When you're going to the jobs, so they have pipelines. Inside pipelines, they have jobs. You can see the coverage report here. The 2 cool stuff here are the actual test results here, like all the data you get about pass and fail and duration can automatically get here. And the second thing, if I go back and click on this, my internet is slow. I'm afraid you might. Okay, here it is. So you have this coverage report, and you can click on everything and get the details of each part.
Yeah, I think Cypress definitely has the sort of the what you're looking at in GitLabs feels to me like the sort of like product version that they have of like the sort of UI of representation of your test runs. But the coverage reports and whatnot, like the sort of like Istanbul NYC coverage report, is also baked in as well. So you can definitely spin something like that up pretty easily.
That is Istanbul. That was exactly Istanbul. Like,
yeah, exactly.
It was extracted as an artifact.
Yep.
And then it was saved to GitLab pages and available to see.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think like I said, what I liked about the Cypress stuff is that you have the sort of insanity of the JavaScript world at your disposal, right? So like all those tools that you've seen elsewhere, all the things that you've integrated with, seems like they're all in play. So that's pretty awesome. If you couple the ease of use of the tool with everything else that's out there, then it's like, why not? You know?
Yeah, if you're testing the web technology, it would be reasonable to do it with technology.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, sorry, the demo didn't go too deep. I just wanted to sort of talk about the value and some of a quick look at it in action. Yeah. Did you guys have any other questions or anything else?
You mentioned Selenium a couple times. I'm just kind of curious, in your experience, where you were using Selenium, like what made it kind of like a bad or like difficult experience, such that like this is so much nicer.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think Selenium at the time it was kind of brought to the scene. Was at a different time in the web history, right? So Selenium, to my understanding, was built. I think of Selenium as like the Jira of web testers, where it's like it served a need at a certain point. It's existed since then, but in a way that things have just been like bolted on, and like it's not quite what you want, but it's like heavy and weird. If you think about Selenium, the simple form example I did, it was built at a time when you would, so let's say, submit a form, and then the browser's the normal behavior, the prevent default kind of thing that you try to avoid in single page apps now is you submit the form, and essentially your whole UI is wiped and clean, and then you have a clean slate to then start testing from. So the fact that web apps now are obviously very dynamic and stateful and whatnot, you can use Selenium now to test modern web apps, but it's just very clunky. The API is pretty specific. I think it was originally like a Java tool. So yeah, if you haven't used it, I think the learning curve is there. And I think the speed, I think, is probably the biggest thing. The fact that Cypress is just like connected to your app and is like, hey, do this now. It's like lightning fast relative to Selenium, which would either be connected by some other way, or like I said, the idea that you would have to like hard code the state of your application so that you could test a specific piece of it later and like communicate back, and things get out of sync, and like it's just like, man, to like not have to do any of that and just like write some like Mocha API and be like, cool. Like I think that's where it shines for sure. One sort of parting point is like what I've also found really useful about this is like the level the velocity at which you can approach this is like fully up to you. Like I said, I was on like a sort of like a non-web team, and now I'm sort of like bridging the gap between the two. So I'm sort of spreading this gospel to all these different teams. And the idea that it's super easy to get up and running. You could write a few tests like I did and get some coverage almost like first day, and start building from there. You can go as slow as fast as you need to, because you're just mimicking what your app can do. So you can go at a unit level, you can go like full scale and just write like a big end-to-end test. But there's so much room for iteration, and just how you start bringing it on board is great. And the fact that you can skip the UI entirely, either in your CI runs or just through the tests themselves, is just like, yeah, it's just like I said, I'm trying to build a culture of like, maybe we start going TDD and we have Cypress up while we're writing our code, and it's just so easy to do. Then it just sort of opens the door for a lot of things that I think were pretty closed prior, or at least hard to open.
Hey, Paul, thanks so much for your time in like putting this presentation together for us, and for running us through and answering all these questions. I just wanted to say, if you have continued questions, you can hit them in that, throw them in that text chat today in live event text. And then kind of any future testing questions, we do have a channel for that at, it's just in the dev category, it's pound testing. And you're free to kind of share your experiences as you try Cypress out, and kind of tell us what you learn. Next week we have a cool talk. Keith, who's in here right now, is going to talk about thinking in React, and I'm super excited about that. It's going to be at 8 a.m. Pacific time on Tuesday. We just had to move it because of a conflict, but 8 a.m. Pacific time Tuesday. And yeah, I just want to thank Ben, Dan, Foster the Web. I'd love to know your name if you want to message that to me. Joseph View, Keith, Makar, Michael G, Mike, and Paul, obviously, for being here. This was super fun, and hope to see you around. Thanks again.